talking about rare earth minerals, you have laid out just a stark intel brief on what we face right now. We highlighted here that China now refines 85 to 90% of all accessible rare earth minerals. They control 90% of the magnet production, 80% of battery production, owns or influences the majority of foreign mines owned in the United States. And it's not just the rare earth minerals, it's critical minerals. Things from the F-35 fighter jet here in the United States that require 920 pounds per fighter of rare earth minerals just to be successful, all the way to the fertilizer that helps grow things in my home state of Iowa. Now, whether you're a fighter pilot or a farmer, this is some grade A bullshit. We know that the Chinese have the ability to not only control it, but cut it off when they want. The challenge that I think going forward, and my colleagues from the Midwest have pushed forward, is being able to identify critical elements that we can have here in the United States. First and foremost, we were successful with the Trump administration moving forward both potash and phosphates, components critical for input costs for fertilizer. Not only being able to provide our own food supply, but driving down costs for consumers. We built our entire society around these fundamental resources, and when they are cut off, we don't have a backup plan. Now, one of the things that we have known that has been successful is that we need a strategic reset, and it was mentioned by both my Democratic and Republican colleagues here, an opportunity to go back to that World War II mentality of a whole-of-nation approach. This year, we're going to be looking at the Defense Production Act, ways that we can aggressively get after competing with Chinese state-backed subsidized ownership and competition in this space. And while it was passed in the 1950s, it provides the United States the ability to have a strategic engagement against China in these critical areas. The facts are bleak. China is beating us and controlling the entire market, but nothing can outpace or outperform America's ingenuity or innovation in these space. I want to thank our panel for being here and get to the facts of this. Now, Mr. Stauchester, you and your company have worked with the administration in using the Defense Production Act to help prioritize a couple of things. Let me ask this. Has it helped your company move faster and be more competitive against China?
Absolutely.
Has it helped production outpace increase in a way that you wouldn't have been able to do on your own?
Yes.
With the new DPA coming up, do you believe that there's a requirement here for rare earths to be prioritized in America's national security strategy?
Yes.
And specifically, does the DPA allow you to compete with a state-backed Chinese entity that has both companies as well as government-owned entities?
It's certainly a helpful tool in competing.
Very good. I'd like to know a little bit here on how the U.S. measures could successfully decouple with DPA from China and decrease our reliance on China's production of critical minerals. You've got some great examples.
Sure. You know, the Defense Production Act was first invoked for rare earth materials, I believe, in 2019, correct, along with a series of presidential determinations, and it's been used in the past 3 administrations to help build up our domestic capabilities to refine rare earths. We received our first award. It was a very small one. We were a much different company in 2019, and then received 2 more awards in 2020, and that resulted in a little bit of capital investment alongside a lot of private capital from us to bring the separation facility that is now online at Mountain Pass, the one I referenced in my remarks. It is now online. But it wasn't just the capital. I think at that time it was relatively small. It was $10 million relative to a $200 million plus investment. It was the signaling power. We were going public at that time. The U.S. government essentially said this is an important national security project. I think that does sort of signaling power helps to unleash the private markets, the private capital markets, which are something I think we should all endeavor to unleash. And so I do think DPA is incredibly important and has been throughout our history.
I'd like to speak with you a little bit as well. You've worked on the lithium side, such a critical component to our future going forward. Is there an ability for the United States to actually be able to compete against China? And what other tools would you recommend that we do to help secure lithium as a future for the U.S.?
Yes, we actually have a lot of lithium in this country in different forms. In the basin in Nevada, which we're at, which we've done measurements and drilling, and it's the largest in the world. Also in Arkansas and Texas, the Smackover Formation also has lots of promise, and there's another project there that is going to be great. difficulty for up front for us. We've had to compete through market peaks and market troughs. And I want to recognize General Motors as well. They've invested nearly $1 billion in us early on, and they've stuck with us through this project, along with Orion Finance, which the government has chosen actually to work with the Department of War to invest offshore. But it's very, very important that we have a level playing field here. Pricing is key. Look, the government at the end of the day shouldn't have to pay for all of this. But the signals and the data have been completely hijacked by the Chinese. The London Metal Exchange, which this committee identified, is actually controlled by China, which is actually a surprise to me. All the pricing data for rare earths, for lithium, and for a lot of these other minerals that we've been talking about are defined by China. The financial community uses that for their investment decisions, and it dissuades investment. The Chinese, on the other hand, have been shopping around, even in the face of pricing declining, in some cases in our industry, 80% after a peak, and are still buying assets in Africa, in Latin America, all over the world, because it's a long-term play. And the pricing in the market is controlled basically by the government, but also by collusion with CAT, BYD, and others to suppress any further development. When pricing peaked in this industry at $80,000 a ton, I think the committee recognized that there was 2 meetings when pricing went up, and you saw an immediate decline, which has lasted for 3 years. Now it's going up because they can't control it, because the issue that China has, and we have as well, is power. So we're dealing with trying to expand our grid and with adding more capacity. Capacity takes time, building nuclear power plants, twin cycle gas turbines. What's happening right now, and the highest growth in this sector, is actually putting in battery banks of 2 to 10 hours to be able to deal with peaks in communities. Typically 6 to 10 p.m. at night, you come home, you have to have a peaker plant. The batteries are turned on for 2 to 10 hours, whatever that's needed, and they're recharged during the day. It's going to grow 50%. So we're competing now not only on consumer applications and defense applications, but the very core kitchen table issue we have is electricity in this country and power.
Mr. Evans, you're absolutely right. This is a 40-year campaign. The Chinese are using economic warfare against us. Luckily, the resolve is right here in the United States. We have the opportunity to stand up and fight back today.
The minerals and materials we need to build cars, batteries, medical equipment, and modern technology. Lithium, nickel, cobalt are all critical for innovation and supporting industrial growth in Ohio and across America. Right now, China controls most of these minerals from start to finish. They mine them, process them, and manufacture the key components we depend on. And the evidence is clear. China uses this as a control to push other countries like the United States out of the market. They suddenly drop prices to levels no American company can match, or they cut off exports to gain leverage during disputes. When that happens, the impacts hit home quickly. Factories in my district face unstable prices for the parts they need. Auto suppliers can't get the magnets required for electric motors. Steel and chemical producers see costs jump overnight. And workers, many of them union members, who keep our district strong, end up facing uncertainty they didn't create. This is not the result of normal market competition. It's the result of a deliberate strategy by the Chinese government to control the supply chains that power the 21st century economy. And if we don't respond, we risk becoming dependent on China for products that are central to everything, from clean energy to military readiness. People in every corner of my district and all across the Midwest know what it feels like when our industries lose out to unfair competition. We've lived that story before, and we cannot afford to relive it again. So my focus today is simple: to find out how we can protect American workers, strengthen our supply chain, and prevent China's manipulation. I'll start with you, Mr. Slauster. For decades, industries in my district have been hit hard by China's below-cost dumping. Now we're seeing China use these exact same tactics in critical minerals. What changes in trade enforcement would be most effective to protect workers and manufacturers in places like Cleveland from being undercut all over again?
Thank you, ma'am. I've spent a lot of time in Ohio's auto towns, Marysville, Anna, in a prior life. So I know firsthand how those factories are really the engine of those small towns. There were shutdowns earlier this summer as a result, in auto factories in the United States as a result of the rare earth situation. With regard to standards, I think we need to work with our allies and partners and agree on a set of standards that align with market economies, that align with our values. And I think if we do so, and I think we are doing so with some of these agreements that we've been forming in the last few years, I think that will help lift up the entire market over time. And I think it's a really important aspect of the whole conversation.
China's dominance in magnet production gives it the ability to influence global prices overnight. How have you seen China use that leverage to push competitors out of the market or pressure companies trying to build non-Chinese supply chains?
Yeah, I think when you look at the pressure, the low prices put, it's really around getting the capital or attracting the capital that we've heard to scale, alternative technologies. At Niron, our source of iron are iron salts. It's a byproduct of steel making. Our source of nitrogen is ammonia, which is used heavily in the Midwest for fertilizer manufacturing. And so we are bringing back, magnet production, but not playing the same game. We've changed the game. We've out-innovated. And that's what our technology provides us with, other technologies that are alternatives to these rare earths. And so it's critical for us as we're scaling here that we get to scale so we can be fully competitive, right, because of the lower cost inputs, right, from our steel making and from our fertilizer manufacturing that will enable us to provide a reliable, secure supply of magnets to the U.S. economy.
Thank you. And Mr. Evans, you've seen how long-term supply contracts, processing bottlenecks, and foreign ownership can shape whether a supply chain succeeds or fails. In your view, what are the biggest points of vulnerability in the U.S. lithium supply chain today that could slow down or even derail new domestic investments?
I think it's losing the opportunity we have right now. Or I think it's taken some time to actually act on some of the things that are being recognized here so we can level the playing field. I say this as a former proud Ohioan, both my kids are Buckeyes. You can see most of the battery capacity in the U.S. between the Southwest, with a huge chunk of it going in the Midwest because of the skilled workforce and excellent universities that they have. If we take our eye off the ball, I think the chairman mentioned we have a year now, and revert back, it's exactly what China wants us to do. We can set ourselves in a situation where not only we can actually develop the raw materials and the intermediates needed to actually fund supply these facilities. In our case, in the Midwest, you've seen potential structures that have been set up where the Chinese want to set up facilities. But the issue with that is they want us, the good stuff, the family jewels, they want to ship in this case, cathodes. Cathodes and anodes, basically, which is the high-tech part of it, they wanted to ship in and basically just do assembly in the United States. That's not the way it works in China. I spent a large time of my career in and out of China, and you have to bring everything with you. We have the ability to actually build the entire supply chain here, but it all starts with leveling the playing field.
So the report released from this committee proved what we all have known to be true, which is the Chinese Communist Party has been engaging in textbook anti-competitive behavior, overproduction, dumping, government subsidy of those arenas, those industries. And of course, we've seen it very acutely in this critical minerals space. And as a free market Republican, I think about, well, okay, what can we do to try to push back on China's attempts to gain a near monopoly in the critical minerals arena? The U.S. government has taken an equity stake, Mr. Slouster, Mr. Evans, in your companies. That's not normally the first place my mind goes to what our government should do. I'm open to the idea that, as the ranking member said, we need a Manhattan Project approach and maybe unusual times call for unusual tactics. But what can you say that would make me feel a little better about the government owning a piece of your companies?
Well, thank you, sir. This is a very important discussion to have. Free market capitalism is the engine of our economy, no doubt about it. But I think the reality is today we are not operating in a free market. China is both a monopoly and a non-market economy. The most important features of our agreement, and I do think, with respect to some of the other agreements that have been discussed, ours is very, very unique. The actual most transformative feature of that agreement is the price floor, which corrects this distortive non-market behavior that this investigation found. And what the equity piece of the agreement allows U.S. taxpayers to do is to benefit from the upside gain that comes along with correcting for that issue. And as I said in my prepared testimony, it's already manifested in significant unrealized gains for taxpayers. So I think it's important when we think about this, where there is market intervention, it should not just be to absorb risk or take losses, but to enable the U.S. government and the taxpayer to participate in some of the upside. And I think that's what our agreement allows for.
In our case, in return for the government's equity stake, we're being offered the lowest cost of capital in the world. As I mentioned here, one of the difficult parts for industries like ours is actually the upfront capital cost, because again, we're not on a level playing field. I have to follow laws here, and there's things that we need to do. So the $2 billion of low-cost capital is actually a huge advantage, but it's also a signal to the industry that this is important, and to also the private sector. That loan, which was under process, which took about 2.5 years to go through the whole process, attracted General Motors, which put in a base investment and actually became a joint venture partner, and also attracted Orion, which, again, the U.S. government's working with offshore to develop mining projects with the Department of War. Those two partners likely would not have come if it wasn't a public-private partnership. And as I echo Matt's comments as well, if we do well, the taxpayer should do well. So this really enabled our project to be successful, but has also sent a signal to the industry, this stuff is important, and now more private capital has actually been involved. So we're happy to be a good example for the rest of the industry, but also—
Well, and gentlemen, listen, I get it. I mean, you're arguing in essence that this is a super special circumstance, and that, because hearing phrases like, oh, if our company does well, then the American taxpayer does well. I mean, that's just not how we view the private sector, right? That if that store owner or that dentist or that architect does well, that there's an equity stake for government. I mean, generally, if they do well, they pay more taxes, right? So, but that's the more traditional system. I'm open to the idea that this is a bold approach that is unique to your industry. Mr. Evans, you said you hope that this can be an example for within your industry. I just hope it's not an example across other industries, because it does seem that if we start to do this in other industries, we're going to go to a place that doesn't feel like free market capitalism. But with the limited time I've got left, Mr. Evans, help me. You mentioned permitting reform briefly. It seems like a hugely important part of where we need to go if we're actually going to become a global leader in critical minerals. Share some additional thoughts.
It's really for anything, sir. Any type of infrastructure we want to build in this country. I don't care if it's a cell phone tower, it's high tension lines. We're under the same laws, NEPA laws and so forth. And look, we need to have very strong regulations in this country, but a lot of the regulations were actually struck and cast when we were in a time where we were dealing with an opposite problem, which it was overgrowth in housing, overgrowth in industry and so forth. It's a real barrier. The goal of all of this is to have private sector come forward, but they need certainty around things. Our process was 5 years. Look, and I was sued. I was permitted by the Trump administration, and 1 week later, I was sued. And I was stuck in court for 4.5 years. I went through a formal appeals process. I went through an appeal process on top of that in California and the circuit court. And part of the issue behind that is the groups that actually do that, they know they're not going to win. They just want to slow you down and hopefully bankrupt you because you're not going to get any financing. And this faces our whole country. And we're at a point now where we have to grow. We have to put important infrastructure in place. Can you imagine building the interstate highway system today in this country? You would never get done. So we have to fix this where there are limits around appeals and not depend on whatever judge that you get or somebody listening to 2 people out of 100 that are claiming the same thing over and over again. The certainty, if it's not there, look, I've talked to the Koreans and the Japanese and so forth. They would rather invest here than anywhere else in the world. Once you have an asset, and the government's not going to take it away, we're the strongest economy in the world. You'll attract actually even more overseas investment here if there's certainty around the legal process. It's much too litigious and much too long.
Is now the semiconductor hub of the United States of America. The CHIPS and Science Act has delivered more than $11 billion in federal support to our state in this critical industry. Those investments are going to create 38,000 new jobs anchored by major expansions at Intel and the historic $165 billion commitment from TSMC. These facilities do not exist in isolation. They sit on top of a supply chain built from dozens of upstream inputs, including gallium, germanium, antimony, cobalt, and other critical minerals that make modern chips possible. The Chinese Communist Party holds overwhelming control of that upstream supply chain. China refines the heavy majority of these minerals. In some cases, such as with rare earth elements used in F-35s at Luke Air Force Base and in the magnets that power electric vehicles, their dominance is close to total. This translates to leverage. Last December, Beijing restricted exports of gallium, germanium, and antimony in retaliation for U.S. export controls. These actions disrupted global markets overnight, and they were a reminder to every advanced manufacturer in the world that the PRC can tighten the spigot whenever it chooses. This is not an abstract threat for my state of Arizona. Our semiconductor industry, our defense installations, our EV manufacturers like Lucid Motors, all depend on reliable access to the minerals China has spent decades cornering and manipulating. We are also watching a global race unfold in clean energy. China has reached a point where it installs more renewable power each year than the United States and Europe combined. It has nearly doubled the world in solar capacity. It produces close to a terawatt of renewable energy capacity annually. These are staggering numbers, and they give the PRC an enormous economic advantage. This matters to Arizona, where solar already provides almost 14% of our electricity, and where domestic manufacturing is expanding but still lacks a full supply chain. Energy markets and mineral markets are now inseparable from national security. This is defense industrial bases and our clean energy deployment. We don't need to be provocative to recognize the risk. We need to be realistic and clear-eyed. There is a practical path forward. We need to build regional supply chains, expand processing and refining outside of the PRC, and support upstream diversification with our allies. We need to deepen cooperation with our partner in the Americas and Indo-Pacific, and we need to make targeted investments that reflect the scale of the challenge. That's why I work to include the intent of my Semiconductor Supply Chain Security and Diversification Act in the House Foreign Affairs Committee's DFC reauthorization. Strengthening the DFC's authority to invest in semiconductor supply chains is a bipartisan step we can take right now. The United States should never be in a position where a single foreign government can threaten our economic security or undercut the industries at the heart of Arizona's growth. The stakes are straightforward. If we want to maintain our leadership in semiconductors, protect our national security, and compete in a global clean energy economy, we can't afford to let the PRC's dominance harden into permanence. Mr. Evans, we have companies in Arizona, from semiconductors to EVs, that need reliable lithium supply. What's the realistic time frame for standing up non-PRC processing capacity if the U.S. and its partner actually move with needed urgency?
Our project actually started in 2007. It's been 18 years. Our company took it over in 2016. So these are very lengthy processes. We're lucky that we're blessed with a lot of these critical minerals in the U.S. They're not going to get out of the ground, though, unless we have reform around permitting, unless we have government support for price transparency to attract private capital, and then in the case of a lot of things we've been talking about here, grants, other financial instruments that we can pull in place to help spur things along. It's going to take many years. Luckily, though, we have our allies. There are deposits like this in other countries, in other like-minded countries like Canada and others that we can collaborate with. But we've got to start the ball rolling now. What you see here, I think, is a great start, but it's certainly, we're not done.
In my district, Florida State University recently established a Center for Rare Earths, Critical Minerals, and Industrial Byproducts. Now, FSU is also the home to the National Magnet Lab. I'm sure you're familiar with your business. These are very special high-power magnet labs. They exceed field strengths of 30 Tesla. Recently, they've been researching and reporting on separating rare earths, critical minerals, not all of them, but something like 24 of them, from the tailings of old burned-out phosphate mines. These are phosphate mines that haven't been used in decades, but the tailings are still there, and they just reprocess them with magnets instead of chemical processes and smelting. Are you familiar with this process at all?
I am not familiar with that process. I am familiar somewhat with the companies that are trying to do that. And, this is another alternative, right, where we can take tailings and basically rework those to provide some of the mineral supplies that are critical here in the U.S.
Either of you gentlemen familiar with that process? It's new research, and I mean, I don't know much about it myself.
I am, sir. In general, the principle of extracting critical minerals of various types, including rare earth elements from industrial byproducts, it's interesting technology. The challenge is that in many cases, the concentration of the rare earths in these byproducts are in the hundreds of parts per million versus in the ground at Mountain Pass, the second largest rare earth mine in the world, it's 60 to 80,000 parts per million. So the amount of stuff you need to move to get what you want to process becomes challenging, and that's where these advanced processing technologies like that you referenced come into play. And I do think it's an interesting area where we should continue to.
I was interested in it too. So, and maybe Mr. Evans, you could answer this. Can you see how companies like yours might benefit from public-private partnerships with academia, institutions like FSU, that do research in these areas?
Yes, sir. We're actually working with the University of Nevada at Reno. We work with Colorado School of Mines, with Penn State. It's an important bridge between business and academia, not only for a pipeline of new students or new employees through students, which we do actively with internships, but also on new innovative ways, whether it be from recovery out of like tailings for phosphates, or in the case in our industry, optimizing process steps to lower the cost. At the end of the day, all these industries, you want to set them up that they're world-class, so they compete on a global market.
When I read the research, I was interested. It looked like it might be a way to quick jumpstart the process, because we know how difficult it is to mine in the United States of America. Also, Mr. Evans, if our goal is to encourage domestic mining and refining, how should we structure our production tax credits or price supporting mechanisms so that we don't accidentally re-engineer our dependence on China, and we actually do, in real life, incentivize domestic production?
45X was helpful for projects like us. I know that sunsets in the 2030s, but that's certainly an incentive for companies here, just because our operating costs versus the Chinese are always going to be higher. I think price discovery helps in that we need to redefine the narrative and get the financial community also as well to look at those types of things for investment decisions. Things like stockpiling in our industry aren't as necessary, but things like anti-dumping or tariffs, if the Chinese continue to behave this way, are helpful tools in the meantime. I think the complexity around some of the products that we talked about here as well, like today, a lot of the lithium that China has, it's all contained in the batteries. So you can tariff the batteries, which I believe we do, but as processing gets stood up in the U.S., look, we're mainly a chemical company, to be honest with you. If you look at the capital,
I hope we follow your
your
advice on this. So for perhaps all of you, which industries in America are going to collapse first when we run out of rare earths and critical minerals? I mean, who's the canary in the coal mine?
I think the auto industry is uniquely impacted. To build a car, you need 7,000 to 10,000 individual parts. They all have to arrive on time. That any company can assemble an automobile, I think, is a feat of epic proportions. And I think there are so many components within a car.
That's why I can't tell who's
that
weakest.
contain magnets. It's enormously challenging. And so I think that's the canary in the coal mine.
What is the timeline, essentially, that you think, if we were to actually invest the kind of capital that we are talking about, to be able to look at alternatives to replace rare earth minerals, what kind of capital are you talking about, first of all, and how quickly could we actually get this done if we did the moonshot to have this alternative to Chinese rare earth minerals?
Yeah, for magnets in particular, and for our technology, it's several $billions that's going to be required to move the needle And so we're building a 1,500-ton facility right now, but we're also currently in state selection mode for a 10,000-ton facility, and that is going to cost us, between $1 and $1.5 billion to build that facility. So, when you look at the investments required, we're just solving for magnets, but there are many other critical minerals that we need to solve for. But I will say that it takes time, right? It's taken us 12 years to get to a point where we're commercializing and scaling the technology, because developing new technologies takes time.
So I guess you would also agree that in addition to the capital that's required, we need to start investing in the R&D, the workforce, the innovation, all of these different things, as was mentioned earlier, recruiting the very best and brightest that's going to help us come up to alternatives to what right now we're completely dependent on China to import in. I have just a few seconds left, but would like to ask all of you, right now we're literally shipping all of our e-waste to China and to countries, quite frankly, that are easily manipulated by China so that they can extract a lot of these critical and rare earth minerals in processes that are very environmentally unfriendly, and then be able to take that back to China. Should we ban exporting e-waste, given we know that the technology and the value is there to recycle and harvest critical and rare earth minerals from our electronic waste that we have right now? Is this a potential strategy? Are we literally shipping off critical and rare earth minerals to China, given that we really don't have a robust recycling mechanism here in the States?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the other alternatives that has to be looked at and explored and supported. There are companies out there trying to do that, but there are challenges with separating post-consumer recycled content to separate those minerals, as you mentioned. So I think they need to be explored, and part of the innovation support you mentioned, they need to be looked at as one other potential solution here to limit our dependence on China.
But would you not agree that at least for now, minusing the technology and the processing facilities, we are literally shipping out from this country critical and rare earth minerals back to China or many of their friends and allies that ultimately will allow them to recoup even more of the critical and rare earth mineral market?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely opportunity. There are companies out there that are already starting to look at this, but they need to be supported. I don't think they have all the solutions and have scaled yet, and that's, again, back to the investment needed to be able to do that.
I would agree, and I'd add that the pricing for that, like black mass, is actually controlled by China as well. So they control the demand, they control the supply, and it makes it difficult for companies with innovative technologies in the U.S., even in Europe, to actually compete because the price floor is so low.
Yeah, we have heard loud and clear that the CCP really uses their pressure tactics to take advantage of and manipulate certain markets using a lot of illicit means to do that, and they are able to dominate in those spaces because the playing field is not level. We saw what happened during COVID. That really, I think, spotlighted our over-reliance on China, specifically with the supply chain and what that did to affordability for American consumers, and that's really, I think, our focus going forward as we talk about critical minerals and how many things they're in. We talk about how is that affordable for consumers, and I think the CCP's goal is understanding those and how geopolitical they are in nature and how they fit into the bigger strategy that we're playing here. I think it is apparent that we cannot let their dominance grow further, and that's why I think these conversations about how we level the playing field, what we do strategy-wise going forward are so critical. So what I want to talk about today is how they've been able to do this, how they've been able to aggressively undercut not only the prices, but dominate foreign markets. And we've seen them use that playbook specifically in the auto industry. Can you discuss, maybe, Mr. Slauster, the ways in which they are using their undue influence and unfair practices to dominate those critical mineral supply chains, to impose the leverage over industries like the automotive industry? We saw that play out during COVID. We've seen a little recovery in the last few years, but how has that played out? And then using that as an example, specifically in the auto industry, how can we maintain affordability for American consumers as we're looking to maybe shift around our supply chains to not be so reliant on China?
Yeah, it's a really important point. I think the interesting thing, certainly about like rare earth magnetics, is relative to the total bill of materials on a car, it's a very insignificant portion. The cost, the bill of materials for the actual rare earth magnets inside an automobile, it's very small. But you can't build the car if you don't have the magnets. And think about what's happening today. In order to secure your magnet supply chain, and you're an automotive company, you're having to apply for a license, and you hope it gets approved, and you hope it gets approved so that you can keep your auto plant running. So think about the coercive effect of that. What do you think those companies have in the back of their minds when they're deciding where to build their next generation product right now, literally right now? Where should we site that plant? This is why having this sort of control is coercive and kind of seeps into the decisions of all of really corporate America, and I think that's why this is such a critical issue. As I said in my prepared testimony, this industry is small. It's tens of billions of dollars, but there's trillions of economic activity downstream that it impacts, and that's why this issue just has to be taken off the table.
Yeah. Given their price manipulation and, of course, global dominance in critical mineral supply chain, do you think that Chinese auto manufacturers pose an existential threat to our American manufacturers because they have the control over these mechanisms?
Well, I think China has very astutely recognized that the rare earth industry, while it may be a small industry, is absolutely vital to competitiveness in the downstream industries of the future, not just cars. One thing we talk about a lot is physical AI, robotics. Robotics are probably going to be the largest industry the world has ever seen. All of the motion in a robot is rare earth magnet actuators. It's not just the products of today, but it's the products of tomorrow. And absolutely, if you control the upstream supply chain, you can become enormously competitive and dominant downstream. And just look at Europe's auto market today and how many Chinese cars are sold in Europe today. And I think it's no accident that that's happened.
So I think I know your answer probably to this next one then. Should we allow Chinese manufacturers to make their cars here? Should we allow them to develop batteries and advance that supply chain here in the United States?
You know, I'm going to keep my comments isolated to the rare earth supply chain, but that does not sound like a great outcome to me, no.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so we know that our allies, you talk about Europe, they didn't do enough to thwart the threat of China's dominance in rare earths. We filed a World Trade Organization complaint only that caused China, of course, to shift their tactics in this space. So they've always found ways to kind of dodge and go around it, but thankfully we're seeing some pushback there from the Trump administration. We know China was also able to dominate the lithium industry specifically in a very short time span, and if it took, as we know, less than a decade to really control such a pivotal part of the supply chain, what would you say, Mr. Evans, is the next thing that we need to address now, right? I think my colleague talked about looking ahead and playing the long game here. Is there any place that's kind of a blind spot for us outside of lithium that we need to be looking at to get ahead of this?
I can't comment as much about minerals outside of lithium, but I think there are other examples that are on the critical minerals list that came out that are all important, you know, whether they be related to some of the gallium and others that are used in small quantities. I don't know if all those are getting the same attention. Antimony, there's a variety. Again, it has to be a holistic look, even with our neighbors like Canada and other allied nations. But I'm hoping, the question was asked earlier, when's the moment? I'm hoping it's now. That we take a look at what kind of threats these have, what ability we have in this country to actually respond. And the question you asked earlier, I think it's tough for the automotive manufacturers because you have to get a foot in both worlds. So I have no choice but to buy from the Chinese. So, and they have global markets. They can suffer the same consequences where Chinese government can actually, literally just one company can't buy here anymore, you know, as punishment. So until we put alternatives for them, and I'm not saying that we wholesale, we're completely independent, but alternatives that are either here or in allied countries, I think it's very difficult for the automotive manufacturers, I think it's like 4% of our GDP, to actually make clean decisions like that.
It's no secret that China, over the last number of decades, has built up their critical mineral industry, whereas we have not. We face many challenges in this country in order to accomplish that, and certainly permitting reform, as you've talked about, Mr. Evans, in response to Mr. Johnson, is a big part of that. So I'm thinking that this is good timing to bring this issue up, because we're looking at, in Congress right now, addressing some of the critical aspects of building out infrastructure, and that could mean a long list of different things, and certainly mining is part of that, so I'm glad we're talking about that today. As we go through this debate and discussion, I want to hear from you guys, all of you, if you have some input here. What are some of the key factors that should be addressed as we look at this permitting reform issue? What would be the most helpful in your space?
Putting at least aspirational, but hopefully more firm time limits on things, the formal permitting process, and I also think the same around the appeals process. Again, it rolls down to sometimes who the federal judge is, whether they're going to allow more folks into the trial itself. It's very unpredictable. There is a process that was been made by the first Trump administration for a year for a record of decision. It's difficult, partly because actually it's difficult to find folks. We're in Nevada. Nevada's a great state to operate in. It's a mining state, and we're proud of that. But in other states, you perhaps don't have the same experience nor the amount of staff to actually get that done. I think as well, you can work with private companies where they can assist actually through the permitting process with actually more help for the federal government in terms of outside resources that they need to actually move things forward. And I think once you get to a point where there's a decision and there's an appeal, there has to be some sort of time limit on that as well. I could have been in construction a year and a half ago. Between the manipulation of price and driving it down, the lengthy process we had to go through appeals where private capital is afraid to come off the sideline, and even legislation we have here, the loan can't even be closed and drawn until you have no more litigation. And it's all compounds and slows things down. And in unfortunate cases with some companies, it bankrupts them.
Yeah, which, like you said, is the goal on some of these people's parts. Anybody else?
I think in these industries, permitting does need to move more quickly and ideally at the speed of national security. There are national security implications. I think due process is important. Not all projects, not all mines belong in all areas. That's a reality. I agree with my colleague here that if you put timestamps on a process to allow that to happen, I think that's hugely helpful. But I just want to highlight too that there are very high standard projects. A lot of people are surprised when I tell them the second largest rare earth mine in the world is in the state of California, that we operate in an incredibly environmentally responsible way. I'm very proud of that. It is very possible. And I think that's what everyone should keep in mind. There is a way to do this responsibly, and we just have to figure out how do we get there more quickly.
Yeah, good deal. Some of the minerals certainly are not that we need are not geographically located here in the U.S. We have to depend on other sources, obviously. So how can this country better leverage our relationships with our allies so that we're less dependent on places like China? Are there things, opportunities there perhaps that we can identify?
Maybe I'll go first. I think it's every single country outside of China is facing for rare earths the same licensing issues, right? It's not just the U.S. And so I think it is critical to basically come together and work together to try and solve and create these alternate supply chains and support the critical industries, around the world.
Very good.
Yes, I know we've had recent discussions with Australia, and Australia has actually suffered the same fate with their nickel industry, even their lithium industry, with dumping in China. Because they send the raw materials in, and unfortunately there's not really processing capabilities in Australia. Canada is another country that we've done a lot of work with. We can continue, or their neighbors next door, and they're rich in some of the minerals that we don't have here as well. Even countries, even the European Union, I don't know what their mining regime is like there as well, but in Scandinavia and other places there are actually good deposits of actually critical minerals as well. But we're all suffering the same issue, and I think it's all coming to roost, all these countries that somewhat sold our soul and allowed China to take the narrative here. It's hollowing out the downstream industries, which are highly technological. This country is going to retard their growth because the Chinese can shut off this whenever they want to.
Yeah, right.
I would just add, support U.S. companies projecting American capabilities abroad. I think we have to go abroad in some cases, and it should be American companies doing so.
Oh, great.
I look forward to the day when we make the Chinese can eat their lithium And so I don't think that we're gonna, we're chasing tails here. I don't think we're ever gonna get to the point that we're gonna be able to compete with the Chinese on the rare earth issue. I really don't. I mean, I just think that if we even try, they'll take steps to make sure that it fails. They'll embargo us or whatever, and then we'll cry uncle, and that's it. So I'm more focused on alternatives and investing in alternatives. Are there alternatives to these rare earths today? Or are there alternatives to these rare earth materials and the uses for them, you know, you can see on the horizon? And then Mr. Roundtree, if you can answer that, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think, you know, we developed our technology, you know, over 12 years to really solve the challenge with rare earth magnets, right? So this is a new type of magnet technology. It's the first new magnetic material being commercialized in 30 years. There are other alternatives that need to be developed and invested in and found, but it's not necessarily going to be a quick solution to this.
Right.
But we have to invest now. We have to start that journey now. We're fortunate that the Department of Energy had the foresight to invest in Niron after the first world's rare earth crisis back in 2010-11, where a Japanese impounded a Chinese fishing trawler, and that was the first kind of signal how China would use rare earths really as an economic trade weapon. So yes, we need to invest in these alternatives now, but it is not going to be quick and easy. We're fortunate that for Niron, we're at a place where we've already gone from the gram to the ton scale, and now we're really scaling the technology. So we're in the right place at the right time with the right product to help solve for rare earth magnets. But there are other alternatives that need to be developed and innovated and invested in.
Wouldn't it be cheaper just for us to go full blast on developing alternatives versus trying to catch the Chinese at this game? I think the Chinese are so far ahead, it's impossible for us to catch up.
We need all of the above solutions to this right now. So we need to do all of the things that we've talked about here today and more. Because this is a crisis for the U.S. supply, but also for the West, and we have to work together to solve this as quickly as possible.
Well, right now we need their rare earths, but they also need our money, our cash. And I've been saying here we need to decouple from China because I think we're funding the instrument of our demise every single day. Every dollar that we send over there is actually going to be used against us, and it is being used against us. What percentage of the rare earth market does the United States represent?
We mine, what
No. What percent of in other words, the processed end product, how much of it do we buy? What percentage of the world market do we need here for our purposes?
I can answer that. So the U.S. uses around 50,000 tons per year of magnets. They don't buy that amount of magnets. They're embedded in a lot of the end devices, you know, cars, audio systems, pumps, motors, et cetera, that contain those magnets. Today, it's around 300,000 tons of magnets globally, right? So it's around 15 to 20% of the world's rare earth magnets are being supplied into the U.S. in a variety of different end-use applications.
How about the European Union? How much do they consume?
It's a little bit less, but it's that kind of same 10,000. It's less, but it's quite significant.
So with us and the European Union, well over a third of the market?
Yes, I believe so.
So
we can provide that information afterwards in writing if that would be helpful.
would the European Union be willing to, one of the things that I looked at here, the testimony, or at least some of the things that I saw was that, maybe what we should do is establish kind of rolling tariffs on these materials so that a Chinese rare earth materials we would never allow it to be cheaper than, say, a U.S.-made product. So, it would bounce up and down. So if somehow the Chinese, really wanted to suppress the price of a certain product, certain material, we would then raise the tariff on that material so that it would always be kind of like equal to the United States. Do you think that the European Union would join us in this effort, knowing that they're just as vulnerable as we are to Chinese manipulation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I can't comment on the European Union, but I will point out that even though we use 50,000 tons a year here in the U.S., we're not buying that many magnets. It's significantly, it's around 7,000 to 10,000. So the challenge there is that they're embedded in different end devices that we're purchasing. So how do you manage that, or how do you regulate that or provide tariffs on that? It's not an easy question to figure out.
Each of you being here today to discuss this very important issue about critical minerals and the CCP's economic warfare against the American people. A warfare that, as each of you know, is strategic, it's long-term, and as our report today aptly describes, it's predatory. When our country prepares for war, or when any country prepares for war, what does it do? It not only stockpiles resources that it needs, but it also seeks to consolidate the means of production to ensure that their populace and industries are the only ones who can consume those in a very critical time period. That's exactly what I think Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party are doing. The goal in my mind for them, and I think they've stated this clearly, is total control, total domination. We both, the United States and China, know how vital critical minerals are. We both understand how vital that role is in our economy across the world. I want to start talking about something specific to my region, Northeast Texas. It's a region where lots of lithium is. And lithium, as many people know, but for those that are watching that don't know, it's critical. It's a key critical mineral that the U.S. must invest in, and that we will see dividends if we properly do. East Texas is at the forefront of that, as all of you are aware of, with companies nearing production in that area. Northeast Texas has the highest grade lithium brine resource in all of North America. It's part of that Smackover region. It's part of that Smackover formation that spans from western edge of Florida all the way to East Texas. And we're proud to be supporters of that development in Northeast Texas as we can. So let me start with you, Mr. Evans. What are the most significant barriers that your companies have faced when trying to start a new critical minerals project in the U.S.? You mentioned a few earlier. And then how can the federal government either get out of the way or give your industries the ability to progress quickly?
Thank you, Congressman. And you're right. I know the Smackover formation well. Actually, good friends with the CEO of Standard Lithium, so they're doing great work. Look, permitting, and it's a little different probably maybe in the region there's a lot of private land, but still state gets involved and there will be federal involvement. So to the extent that the red tape can be cut and the permitting processes actually can be predictable, I think that's really important. Number two of that, again, is capital. The cost of these projects is very similar in terms of capital intensity. It's going to be more than the Chinese. It's going to be more than Africa and so forth. These are high-quality, world-class resources, but getting over that capital hump, this is no different than, to me, semiconductors. Building a semiconductor fab in the United States is very expensive. However, once they get into operation, their operating costs are world-class. Both these deposits can operate actually on a global basis and actually become a new supply free from Chinese control, but getting over and getting financing is really key. But part of that, as I mentioned before, is pricing transparency. Both of these projects could have moved much, much faster if the Chinese hadn't included over the last 3 years to depress lithium prices to an all-time low. As I mentioned before, and actually the CEO of CATL actually even admitted, there was an active effort amongst the Chinese government and actually the largest battery suppliers to push the price of lithium actually well below their cost to run it. I know the deposit that they have in China, and they're claiming it's really great. If it was so great, they would have done it 10 years ago. It was an active effort actually to suppress projects like that and ours from actually growing.
Can you help the American people understand, or any of the three of you, how large the deposit of lithium would be across the United States in that Smackover formation, what it could be transformationally to our economy and to our ability to become independent from and decouple from China?
Between Nevada and the Arkansas-Texas region, we have much better reserves than the Chinese do. And actually, if you combine them together, it's more than what you actually have in Bolivia. It's higher grade and better than what you have in Canada. It's actually better, more responsible mining techniques. We could be actually a world-class, sizable global supplier of actually lithium refined chemicals in this country and actually usurp the Chinese.